Hey everyone, this is Louis7 and another trait build guide video. So after getting some feedback from my last guide in this style, which was my first guide in a while, I will be doing this one in a pretty similar way. A lot of positive feedback from that one. So I will be going over the build and its aspects in a fair amount of detail and discussing a lot of my thoughts. And this build is on the Redline Captain, which is a class and build that focuses on supporting fellows. So the build that I am doing focuses on leveling in particular right now, especially with the legendary server, since that is what has been motivating me to make these guides in the first place. And since the captain isn't much of a strong solo DPS class, unlike Hunter, for example, as you will see, some of the traits I end up picking will be more with group content in mind and not entirely focused on solo leveling through landscape questing, but I will still pick some traits for solo, of course. And I do want to point out that, like all my other trait guide videos, this one isn't for captains who are already raiding and could basically make the guide of their own and have their build that works for that. It's more focused on leveling, and then casual group content it definitely works for. And again, with the legendary servers, any group content in that it will work for. And I just want to note this is more important for captains in particular, because some may want more fellowship support traits, particularly in the blue line that I will end up picking, but again, if you're like raiding, you might want to pick more compared to my build. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the build here. So we're going to focus again on the red line, lead the charge for the captains. And just for speccing in, you get Shadow's Lambnet, which is a pretty useful melee skill. It starts out with a 20-second cooldown, so it may not seem too useful, but it'll get a lot of boosts and benefits that'll make it one of your most impactful skills as a captain, actually. And now you'll have Sure Strike has a chance to give Relentless Attack to Fellowship when it's used in battle state. So that's going to be a buff for your Fellowship when it's used when you're in a battle ready state. And you get in a battle ready state from Battle Shout. And that just gives you a state for 15 seconds, which actually lets you use your Devastating Blow and Pressing Attack skills. Both of those require you to actually be in battle state. So we'll see a lot of the dynamics from captains come from getting into your battle ready state, and then your battle ready state skills put you in a battle hardened state. And it's really just that dynamic of going from battle ready, battle hardened to back to battle readied, and then going through that. So that's what we'll see with that. And then we'll have Relentless Attack. That actually says what the buff is. I didn't see that. It gives you critical rating, tactical mastery, and physical mastery, and plus 5% outgoing healing. And then scoring a critical hit causes your target to take 2% more damage for 10 seconds, and that does stack with your other debuffs. Telling Mark and Oathbreaker Shame will be two of your other debuffs you'll get that increase the damage enemy takes. So whenever you get a crit, it'll increase the damage they take. And another theme for the Redline Captain is actually taking crits and doing critical damage. As far as a source of their DPS, instead of just buffing fellowships, they actually do some damage on their own. So we'll go ahead and spec into this and see what we can get for our trait points. And I do want to mention again, I think I forgot to earlier, that since this is focusing a little bit on the legendary servers, I believe you get 33 trait points at level 50, the maximum. So I'll kind of stop there. I actually had the build planned out for 33 trait points, and it fits pretty nicely, which I was pretty excited about, and I just remembered about that now that I saw my points available. But we'll go ahead and start this build and look at the 3 traits we can get. So this first trait increases the damage of Devastating Blow, Light of Elendil, Pressing Attack, and Routing Cry. So at this low level, you might not have many of these, but these will be 4 skills, or is it? Yeah, it's actually 5 skills it is 4 skills you use often anyway. So that will be something to look back on. It increases their damage up to 10%, and then 5% for the increased critical chance. And again, critical strikes and critical damage will be a decent part of your captain's DPS here. The other one is light type damage. You really don't have that much light type damage at low level. You mainly have Battle Shout and then Routing Cry. Not really too much compared to your melee damage, but that is just a passive boost to your light type damage, so something to look back on again. And then the third trait here increases your melee damage and attack speed. This is something I always like. Decreasing attack duration, especially with the captain, will allow you to get your buffs more frequently and go through your battle readied and hardened state. So that's something I definitely think is worth getting, and even kind of icing on the cake is just increased melee damage up to 3%. But yeah, attacking faster is definitely nice as a captain here, so we'll go ahead and take that trait and get 3 points in that. That does leave 2 points. I think getting the increased damage up to 6% of Devastating Blow, Light of Elendil, Pressing Attack, and Routing Cry. So we have Devastating Blow and Pressing Attack are your 2 battle ready skills, and then Light of Elendil you won't have yet. It comes a lot later, but that's from Blade of Elendil, which you can use that once you become battle hardened. And then Routing Cry is your defeat. When you defeat an enemy, a defeat event, it makes it a lot stronger. It's actually an AoE and one of your few AoEs you get as a Redline captain. So yeah, we'll go ahead and put 2 points in that. Oh yeah, my point was that that's more worth it than just getting light type damage because it affects more skills and the amount it increases is a lot more. So that will unlock the next row and the next set bonus. And the first set bonus here is Shadow's Lament grants battle ready state, so already becoming more useful. You can use that in addition to Battle Shout to become battle readied, and then yeah, you can use your battle readied skills, or you can use Sure Strike to get that really nice buff you can get from using it while battle readied, which you always want to do. So yeah, that unlocks the next row here, and in this row we have increased bleed damage, and another theme of Redline Captain is your own bleed damage. It's really, overall in the grand scheme of things, not too significant, but as far as the Redline Captain, their solo DPS, what they actually produce, it's a somewhat significant amount, I guess is the way to put it. Your crits and crit magnitude is really more the focus, but bleeds is more of a sustained damage, I guess would be the way to put that. And then we have this one, when you're in a battle hardened state, you can get increased melee critical damage. So that one requires you to already be in a battle hardened state, and it's not just melee critical damage. And another thing at this really low level is you don't want to be relying on crits, and increasing your critical damage requires you to have crits in the first place, and this one requires you to be in a battle hardened state, so that's not looking too appealing. Everything else before looks better than that. And then here's Telling Mark, your Redline debuff here. So you can only have one mark on this, so if you have multiple captains in your group, only one Telling Mark. Usually if you have multiple captains, you try and put a couple of the different marks. If you have 3, all 3 marks would be best, but the other good mark is the blue line one, which we will actually end up picking in this, but that's way later in this build. So to get back on topic, Telling Mark is worth picking because it increases the damage enemies take by 5%. And then we have, yeah, back to bleed damage or react to battle or deafening shouts for the light type damage. I think finishing out react to battle to get that extra 4% damage and the increased critical chance from those skills, which again, another thing to show increased crit chance, increased crit damage. So we'll go ahead and get 1 point in that. And for the other 2-3 points we need to spend to unlock the next row, I think getting the bleed damage would be best. I'd consider light type damage, but it only increases it by 6%, and again, you just don't have that many light type damage skills. You will have more bleed damage, and again, all the negatives I talked about with the critical damage when already battled hardened. So I'll put 3 points in the bleed type damage, and then that will unlock the next set bonus in next row. So here we have Cutting Attack causes you to deal additional critical damage for a short time. Again, more critical damage, and yeah, that just gives Cutting Attack a buff on yourself to increase your crit damage. Something to keep in mind, but it's pretty passive since you'll be wanting to use Cutting Attack a decent amount because you don't have much else to use and you want to apply your bleeds. So in this row we have 4 traits, which is quite a lot, but we'll go ahead and go through them one by one. So this one is when Routing Cry consumes a defeat event, so this requires a defeat event. It gives a boost to attack speed for your fellowship. If you don't know me, I love attack speed and stuff like that because attacking faster is always more fun, but it's often also more useful actually, on top of just being fun to me. So I definitely think this trait is going to be worth picking, and compared to things we've seen before, this one is worth it, so we'll look at that one and probably pick some. But this next trait increases your critical chance, and you are already getting a lot of stuff for your crit chance and crit damage, and I don't think I've actually mentioned this, but your critical hits with Devastating Blow and Pressing Attack deal a lot more damage. And that's, again, the theme for critical magnitude, and these are your battle-ready skills there. So that is something we will want. It's probably actually more worth it than Penetrating Cry, but let's go ahead and look at these last 2 traits. And this one's a single skill you can get. It's 2-minute cooldown skill, so it's a cooldown buff you can do. And it does a lot for you. It puts you in a battle ready state first, and it just increases your damage by a fairly significant amount, almost 25%. And that's just from the battle ready. Actually, you get increased damage for being battle readied. And then the next one, the actual buff this provides other than battle ready, is decreases your attack duration by 20%, which is a significant amount, and still increases your damage by 20%, and then increases your critical damage by 20%. So it's a very useful buff to have, and something you pretty much want to use whenever you need damage or just on cooldown to increase your damage output and allow you to apply buffs faster. And another thing it does is also put in enemy defeat response. So if you use like Routing Cry, you get the more potent version of that. Same with Rallying Cry there. So yeah, that's going to be very useful, and so far it's looking like the one we want to pick, but I do want to go over the last trait here, and that's Shadow's Lament triggers a light damage. There's another light type damage event. Proc whenever you have a telling mark on your target, so another thing this actually does is it increase the telling mark damage plus 5% to make it plus 10%, which makes it quite a bit more useful. It doubles its usefulness, really. And then you also have the benefit of yourself getting the additional light damage from Shadow's Lament, another thing to increase that skill's usefulness. So I would go ahead and put a point in Time of Need, and then Advantage Attack to go ahead and get both of those single ones. And that will leave 3 points we need to spend, which I think is actually best to spend in the melee critical chance, because the attack speed from this is nice, but it requires a defeat event. And again, your big focus right now is critical hits, and anything to increase critical hits with Shadow's Lament, or especially like Devastating Blow or Pressing Attack if you're an AoE, is really going to be helpful to you, especially while leveling at this point. I think it's going to be most useful for you. And that's what I pick on my captains when leveling. I think I have one around this level now, actually, that I'm picking this stuff on. So yeah, that unlocks the next, okay, I just remembered we did go over the second set bonus, but that unlocks the next row and next set bonus, and this set bonus is Blade of Elendil causes your next Shadow's Lament to deal additional damage. So now you have Blade of Elendil, again, that's the one you use when you're already battle hardened, and that gives you a fellowship buff to deal additional light damage if you're unfamiliar with what it does. And it can also remove corruption, just something to note from that. Usually it doesn't come up too often that it actually removes corruption, because you want to use it when you're able to anyway. But just basically a passive damage boost for your Shadow's Lament whenever you use Blade of Elendil. Might want to keep it in mind, something you can usually ignore, and you don't want to focus on using Shadow's Lament right after Blade of Elendil just because of that. It's just more of a passive boost you can get every once in a while in your Shadow's Lament, I think is the best way to think about it. Okay, so here in the next row we have Grievous Wounds, which increases grave wound damage, and that max rank causes incoming healing debuff. Well, what I want to say is this increases the damage of a single skill that applies a bleed. Why would we get that when we could increase our damage by 8% just from 2 points and make them bleed, and that would also increase cutting attack damage? So that doesn't look too useful right now. We'll go ahead and maybe come back on that, but pass it by right now, because it really is an insignificant amount on a single skill, and the incoming healing debuff is just not worth it in general. So this trait gives you decreased melee skill power cost. I have never had any power problems on any captain I played. This includes right now on my character, and power potions usually take care of that. So I don't think that's at all worth getting, and it's only minus 12%, really insignificant amount, really. And the last one here actually is going to be useful. So this one is increases Herald and Archer damage. The main thing you want to think about that for leveling is your Archer, because that's the one you want to use while leveling. Your Call to Arms Archer skill would be better than your Call to Arms Herald of War. The Herald of War is really nice if you're doing instances, because it increases the damage of your whole fellowship, but as far as the buff it provides, it's really not worth it to just the single captain compared to how much the Archer will actually help you. So you do want to be using your Archer, and getting 40% increased damage on him will be pretty useful. But one thing we have here is the last rank in the Arterial Strikes increases your crit chance by 1% more, but also increases melee skill critical damage. So getting the critical damage on that, I think, is worth the 1 point before we put 2 points in Heightened Allies, is what that one's called. So it looks like we have to spend 2 more points here to unlock the next row and set bonus. So yeah, now we need to actually backfill some stuff. I think at this point it's good to go ahead and get this routing cry attack speed buff when you use it as a defeat event, because again, that's still a nice buff. We just found some more useful traits along the way. And as far as when you use it to consume a defeat event, it'll increase the attack speed of your fellows, and just something nice to have when you do that. So this unlocks the next set bonus and the next row, and in this set bonus we get Grave Wound applies a bleed to targets around the captain when used on a target with cutting attack. So if you already have cutting attack applied and you use Grave Wound, it'll do an AoE bleed basically. One of your very few AoEs, and it's actually an AoE sustained damage that you can do as a captain. Still overall not too significant damage wise, but is definitely something to keep in mind, because you can actually do more AoE damage now, and you always, in any AoE situation, want to apply cutting attack and then Grave Wound for that purpose. And out of habit I actually do it in that order anyway for single target, because there's really not much different between the two skills. Otherwise, even single target. So another thing this does is it just increases your bleed skill damage, a nice passive for some of your sustained damage. So let's look at the traits in this row, and this one increases two-handed weapon damage. As a red line captain, I always recommend a two-handed weapon instead of a one-handed weapon and a shield. So this would just increase your damage, and before I get to that, the reason I choose a two-handed weapon is because it just increased damage output. And since that's what you're going for as a red line captain, that's kind of why I choose it, for the increased damage. So this will really end up just giving you basically plus 6% weapon damage. On all of your main skills, about plus 6% damage is what that would result in. And compared to something like light type damage or even bleed damage, it's going to be more worth it than some of the other stuff we've seen, but not too appealing right now. So we'll look back at that one, and then this one is your Standard of War, which is it's a banner you put down, and it's a pretty popular captain buff in the area. Your whole fellowship gets a buff, and it applies immediate damage when you use it, and it lasts a pretty long time. 30 seconds is relatively long, can sometimes last a whole boss fight if it's a quick boss fight, just because captains can provide, with all their debuffs and buffs, so much burst damage. It's a real possibility, but anyway, it has a 1 minute cooldown, so you can get about half uptime if you keep using it, which isn't too bad. And getting 1 point in that just unlocks it, so I definitely think it's worth getting 1 point in that to unlock it, but let's go ahead and look at the next ranks for that. So the increased ranks just increase the damage buff it gives you from plus 6 all the way to plus 25% from what it has. And it'll also increase the actual damage it does when you apply it, which isn't... It's actually somewhat significant, but because it's a 1 minute cooldown skill, it's really not too significant that you increase the damage. It's basically a nice passive boost from increasing the ranks. And the only thing rank 5 really does is it makes Standard of War a ground targeted skill, so you can throw it where you want instead of just at your feet. Sometimes that's actually not something you want, but oftentimes it is, so I do think it's worth putting more points in this, because this is a pretty significant buff and you want to be throwing it down even while questing as often as possible to increase your damage, especially if you're fighting a lot of mobs in a tightly packed area. You can just stay there the whole time. But I do think it's worth putting 1 more point in Penetrating Cry to get the Routing Cry attack speed buff before we do that. So we'll go ahead and do that, and now we'll put 4 points total in this, and that'll unlock the next row and set bonus. Okay, so here in this next set bonus, we get an actually active skill, a cooldown skill here. And this one calls out your Shield Brother. I don't think this has actually come up, but your Shield Brother or Blade Brother here will be, you can put this buff on any ally. Usually if you're solo, it's going to be your Herald or Archer in this case. And it just gives them, it makes them the target of some of your abilities, like it says, and particularly Inspire Shield Brother and to arm Shield Brother as it is now. So if I put the buff on him, it'll actually make him my Blade Brother and switch that, but that's what that does, and it's actually a decent buff for the Blade Brother. So usually you don't want to put it on your companion if you're in a group. Usually a higher DPS person would be best, because it increases their mastery and increases the benefits to them most with the increased damage from the cooldown skill here. And Inspire gives a heal, but it's really weak heal overall. It does give a little bit of power, which is often actually more useful for tanks or your DPS anyway. For example, hunters would like that. But anyway, we'll go ahead and continue here, and this is just another skill for them. It's a cooldown, it's only 10 seconds, and the stacking melee and range damage buff on hits isn't too significant, but since you get it as a set bonus and it's not like a trait we have to pick, it is something you still want to use on cooldown just to give you a temporary damage buff, really, for you and your Blade Brother. So yeah, we get that, and something, yeah, again, to use on cooldown for the increased damage. So in this row we get Fellowship of the Blade, and that gives your whole Fellowship a portion of the benefit from your Blade Brother skills. So we just went over what Inspire, and I don't think I went too much over what To Arms is, but it's a 1 minute cooldown skill that increases the Blade Brother damage by 25%. The Blade Brother takes 7% less damage, and they heal for 15% more. So getting your Fellowship 60% of the benefits on that, even if it is on a 1 minute cooldown, is pretty nice. Again, the Inspire gives a tiny bit of morale and a tiny bit of power. It's really not that significant, and generally not worth using unless you have just nothing else available, which isn't too often. Sometimes you can tap in and hope the heal maybe saves the Fellowship somehow if it's like really at that point, but again, the main thing we're looking at here is the To Arms, getting 60% of that to the Fellowship. Okay, so we'll look back at this one because, again, it only affects 60% of it, and on a 1 minute cooldown. Overall, not too appealing, but it is appealing right now, if that makes sense. So this next one increases Grave Wound damage, critical damage, I should add, because that's an important distinction. And at the max rank will decrease its cooldown by 5 seconds and further increase the critical damage. And the critical damage over time is up to plus 50%, which is significant, but again, it requires your dot to crit. And it is useful overall, especially compared to other stuff we've seen. If we look at other stuff we've seen at this point, it is pretty useful, but I think overall at this point, if you really want the ground targeted from Standard of War, I would go ahead and get that. If you find that to be useful for you compared to just placing it at the ground, I would get that. But if you aren't finding that an issue at all and just like placing it at your feet, I would go ahead and put some 3 points in your increased up to 6% damage here. So yeah, we'll get that, and then we have 2 more points to spend, and I think this is actually the time to go ahead and get probably Fellowship of the Blade, actually, because that's going to be more useful. If you're running instances, I should actually add, if you're running instances a lot, let's go ahead and take 3 points out of this, and running with the Fellowship a lot, and if you're like leveling with somebody even, I would definitely put 3 points in this. But if you're more focused on solo and occasionally run Fellowship content and do instances while you're leveling, increasing your damage by 6% will be overall more useful to you. But again, if you do Fellowship content a lot and very frequently, you could go ahead and put 3 points in Fellowship of the Blade. And as a sort of spoiler, we're going to put points in both anyway, so it all ends up the same. It's just which order you put them in. So yeah, now is the time I would go ahead and put 2 points in actually Vital Stroke. And again, if you prioritize Fellowship more than I am right now, go ahead and put 2 more points in Fellowship of the Blade then. But yeah, I would go ahead and get Vital Stroke here. And if you put Fellowship of the Blade points in that first, I would do Impactful Blows before Vital Stroke as well. So at this point, we have spent 30 total points, which means we have 3 more points to spend as far as the legendary servers go, the level 50 cap. And that reminds me, my build, I actually did not want the Grave Wound critical damage over time because that's not too significant. It is something useful and we will get it, but we'll get it after level 50 if we're focusing specifically on the legendary servers. So that's why I'm going to actually put 2 points here in Fellowship of the Blade. Sorry for the confusion with that, but it's just the particular order, and since I'm emphasizing the legendary servers and the level 50 cap, it's just the way it works out, the most efficient way to spend all of the points we have available, all 33 of them. So yeah, now we have 3 points left for level 50, and we get the set bonus in the last row. So that's pretty exciting. Here, this set bonus just gives you gain the benefits of your Blade Brother skills, which is pretty nice. So you get the increased damage from 2 arms, you get the heal from Inspire, which again, it's not too significant of a heal, but at that point it could become somewhat more useful if you need just a little bit of a heal on yourself. In addition, you get, we actually haven't gotten to it yet. We have, here it is, here's the other Blade Brother skill. That one already affects you, so this trait bonus doesn't really give you anything for that, actually. But yeah, just something to keep in mind, you get the benefit from those, so using something like 2 arms on cooldown would also help you and not just your companion, which really wouldn't do too much to your archer if it only affected him, but now that it affects you. And again, keep that in mind with Inspire, but it's a nice passive boost we get, really, just from that. So now we have, again, 3 points to spend. In the last row here, we have Oathbreaker Shame, which is a very useful cooldown skill for the captains. This one is a plus 35% incoming damage debuff, which is really significant. Unfortunately, it only lasts 10 seconds and has a 3-minute cooldown once you unlock it. But it is still worth getting because that's a lot of incoming damage, and it's a strong cooldown and really helps with burst damage for the group, so that's worth getting, and burst damage for yourself as well. And then the other one in here is your companions can damage enemy armor. I think this trait is worth getting compared to other stuff because you're going to be using, especially while leveling in solo, using your archer a lot, and reducing their armor is going to be useful. And even in the group, it's going to provide some benefit to the group if the Herald can reduce the enemy armor. I mean, it just makes the enemy take more damage. So I think putting 1 point in that is worth it. And then, yeah, I would go ahead and do Fellowship of the Blade, and I do want to mention, once again, you can take a point out of Impactful Blows is what I would take a point out of, and go for Standard of War to make that ground targeted, and you can target wherever you want. But if that's not too useful to you, I would go ahead and keep the point of Impactful Blows, and this was how the build would look like with 33 points, which again I believe is the maximum for the legendary servers. Everything I've seen says that, but I don't actually have a level 50 character to personally confirm it, but I think it's pretty true. So yeah, this is what the build would look like at level 50 for the legendary server. So we'll go ahead and continue again for the rest of the levels, because there are a lot more levels in LOTRO, and even though this has the emphasis on the legendary servers will eventually progress past those, and a lot of people still play the other servers, so it's worth going over and for higher level characters as they're leveling. Okay, so now that we finished the red line, it's time to maybe look at some other lines or some points we can spend back in the red line. There are a couple things we saw useful. We didn't finish out bleed damage, so we might look to finish that out. We might look to finish Standard of War out to make that ground targeted. And like I hinted at earlier, we actually will be picking Vital Stroke. I think that's going to be useful. And then increased melee critical damage when you're actually battle hardened becomes a lot more significant at high level. Even before level 50 it becomes somewhat significant. We just had a lot more appealing traits as we went down, because you'll end up being battle hardened, and oftentimes as your combat gets longer and you're higher level and running instances. But as far as instances go, your actual damage output isn't all that significant compared to your buffing and debuffing for your fellowship. Then you have light type damage here, so yeah, a few things useful, but to get a sneak peek in the yellow line, there's really not too much worth it, except for the single one here for increased 8% maximum morale. If you really feel like you need maximum morale or want maximum morale, you can definitely feel free to put some trait points in that. But I would recommend at least finishing out some of the stuff in red line first for increased damage, but that's always an option you have to increase your maximum morale by 8%, which is a decent amount, almost 10%, which is kind of crazy, I guess. It would increase my morale by, it would get me above 70k just from that. Okay, so yeah, I'd go ahead and put 2 points in Vital Stroke here, which would unlock the last set bonus. And this set bonus has a lot to it, so whenever you get a critical hit with Inspire or Shadow's Lambent, your next Blade Brothers skill will crit. So whoever your Blade Brother is, whenever you crit with Inspire or Shadow's Lament, the main one there being Shadow's Lament, your Blade Brother skill will crit. Often you can't really communicate that because you get a crit and then they just happen to attack. You can't really say, now's the time to use Heartseeker and get your guaranteed crit. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work out that well for that, but it's still something nice to just have a passive damage boost on your Blade Brother. And then another thing it provides is Banner of War, causes a stacking critical rating buff to allies within its effect. So Banner of War is already useful for increasing damage. Now it increases their critical rating, increases their crit chance, and critical rating also increases crit damage. So that's something nice to keep in mind for a passive damage boost to a skill we already use as often as possible. And then another thing it does is increases Oathbreaker's Shame duration. So that thing only lasted 10 seconds, and that was a pretty kind of negative aspect to it, is how short the duration was. So now it's going to last 10 seconds longer and doubles it to 20 seconds, which significantly improves it. Already useful, now it just lasts longer for increased burst damage, and if you use that along with all the captain's cooldowns, you just give a lot of burst damage to your fellowship really quickly. Okay, so now is the time I want to go ahead and look at the blue line, because we finished out everything like super appealing. Actually, I will put this. I want Standard Reward to be ground targeted eventually. So I would put for my build 1 point in that. If you aren't interested in it becoming ground targeted, you don't really need to put a point in that. Okay, so at this point I want to go ahead and look at the blue line. And in the blue line, the first trait here increases your melee damage after critical events. So whenever you crit, you get increased melee damage up to 6%. That's actually pretty nice. So we'll take a look at that. This one increases your tactical damage, which includes light type damage. So remember, we were thinking about light type damage here in the red line up to 6%. Well, this would be up to 9%. It does take twice as many points to spend in it, but we're going to get to why I think it's more useful to get this one in the blue line. Because you want to get Revealing Mark just to have an additional mark, but this one can heal allies if you maybe are in a fellowship with two captains, having one with the blue line mark and one with the red line mark, so you can have both of them on, could be pretty useful. And yeah, I just think getting Revealing Mark's going to be a somewhat relatively high priority here. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and put, I think, 3 points in Skilled Hands and then 2 points in the reversal for the crit events increasing your melee damage. Then I'll leave 1 point in Revealing Mark, and now with how many points I have 6 points available for 54 points total. I know you can have like 90 points or something ridiculous if you do everything and get every single trait point, and you have to do a bunch of different things to get that, but maybe if you're leveling and leveling slowly, you'll do that. But unfortunately, I used to use a website, I don't remember the name of it, and then the Bearded Minstrel made one, but I can't. The first one is just not working that I used to use. I think whoever was hosting it like just stopped with that, and then the Bearded Minstrel one just isn't working for me. But I would like to show the rest of the build with a lot of trait points. But we'll go ahead and spend 3 more points. I think this is the time I would get the increased melee critical damage from Hardened Heart in my build. And then as far as points I only have 3 more trait points. I think it's more worth getting the 6% light type damage and finishing out the red line here. So this is what my build ends up looking like as a red line captain, and with how many trait points I have, focus more again on casual leveling. So as far as points, what I would spend the rest on, I would get Dignified Spectacle, which increases outgoing damage and healing. Just something generally useful to have and beneficial to the fellowship. And then Routing Cry, that's the Rallying Cry damage buff. It increases fellowship's outgoing damage. I think that one's pretty useful, but it might actually be worth getting Gallant Display. This one is kind of, I don't know, it's a useful skill, but it does a decent amount of single target damage, but as Redline Captain you aren't spending too much downtime. But this would be a filler skill, and if you want something to slightly heal the fellowship, it's definitely worth getting. And each time you use it, it will increase the damage and healing it does, even though it's not quite like Barrage of the Blue Line Hunter, if you're familiar with that. Not quite that much. And then this one increases Words of Courage healing. That could be worth considering if you use it a lot to heal your allies. getting 20% on that. But my main thing here would be Rousing Cry, and then I would probably end up getting Gallant Display and putting whatever I need to, and actually I would have finished out Dignant Sacrifice just to unlock this line, so probably would end up putting 3 points in that. I'll need to spend 1 more point in something. Probably actually healing Critical Magnitude would be more useful than getting just the increased healing from the single skill. And then in the next row here we actually don't have Valiant Strike as a redline captain, so we can pretty much ignore that. Increased Captain AoE healing, you have pretty much 1 AoE healing skill, and then you do have Gallant Display, I suppose, so go ahead and get that. Would probably be worth it, but I think getting the Tactical Critical Chance and Critical Multiplier would be more worth it, so we'd get that. Having an extra banner is always useful, so that would be pretty much one of my end goals in the blue line, is to get the banner here. And then it actually heals allies and then the radius, so I think that's pretty useful. And then Muster Courage heals the captain on use. Could actually be worth it, just because whenever you remove a debuff, healing yourself on the use, or remove a debuff of an ally, yeah, I think that would be a useful thing to have. I think you have enough trait points to go this far. I actually don't know. If you have enough trait points to go this far, we already have the Your Inspire and To Arms, and those are specifically Song Brother, and you're using your Blade Brother one, so that has no impact. And I don't think you can get anything in this last row, and there's really not too much worth it for the red line captain. Some of it, at this point, you're going to be like almost an off healer because you're picking so many things in the blue line. Not quite as much as a blue line captain, but it's just having some hints at that playstyle. But yeah, getting that banner and increasing that, I think, is definitely one of the more worth it things. And getting Muster Courage to heal yourself is just nice utility. And yeah, that's pretty much how my build would work out. So yeah, just to get a last peek of how this build worked out, we got a bunch of these, not necessarily in this order, going from top to bottom is how that would work. But yeah, I'll go ahead and switch over to the gameplay section here in a second. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the gameplay section of this guide, and like I said, I keep my Archer out, and I'm going to give him my Blade Brother buff because I am solo here, and unfortunately, there isn't a really great place for this character in particular to show gameplay. I'd have a lower level one to show gameplay, but then I can't really show what the actual traits do later on, which is kind of the point of this gameplay section. And I will try to explain what I'm doing, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to do that and keep up and pay attention with everything, so hopefully also just seeing me play and how I use my skills will help you with the red line captain and how to play him, especially at higher level. So like I said, I'm here in Mordor, and there's really no great place for me to do this. My character, his gear is okay, but his weapon DPS is pretty low, which is a big impact on your character strength at this level. And the way Mordor and stats are balanced at this point, he's just not that great, so this stuff is a little bit level below mine, but I think this will still be able to show what I actually use and somewhat the survivability of redline, I suppose. Okay, so just to start off with a regular mob, I can go ahead and use my plus 10% incoming damage telling mark to start off, and since I'm ranged, I'll use Battle Shout, and that'll put me in a battle ready state. Now that I'm in a battle ready state, I use Improved Sure Strike to get that nice buff from it. And then I think I got a nice crit there from Devastating Blow, so that opened the defeat event, which I can now use Routing Cry and give me a attack damage buff. See, there is a lot going on with Captain. Now I use Blade of Elendil, and that will increase the damage of Shadow's Laminate. Then Shadow's Laminate, of course, got that light damage proc, just a ton of things going on, really, in a simple fight like that. Just to try and show you all, like, what is actually going on, I'm actually handling it pretty decently, these single mobs. Maybe my Captain is stronger than I thought he was, but I still think this actually shows how it plays well without me having to worry, like my recent Lore Master one, about dying a lot with what I was doing. Because I just couldn't find with him a good place to show it. Like there, I got a big crit of 12k. All things considered, not a huge crit but at least for the skills, that kind of shows the critical damage to a regular mob. This one's a signature now, so I'll actually have time to use some of my combinations. I haven't even used a cooldown skill, so I'm kind of being a bad captain. I need to show what this banner does, so I can throw it there. You saw how I was able to place it, but I ended up placing it right next to me. And yeah, now I am just doing more damage basically, and he's starting to die faster. I had time to apply my bleeds that time, and a lot of those like nuances that I talked about with Shadow's Laminate and all the passive things, they end up being pretty passive, and you basically start using what's available at just like after you go in the rotation for a while. Oh man. If you are wondering, if you heard that, that was my cats being noisy. Sometimes they actually scare me. So now I'm in a battle ready state, and then use Devastating Blow here to put me in a battle hardened state. Now I can use Shadow's Lambda again, going to use Blade of Elendil. This is actually a time I can use Pressing Attack because I had 2 mobs on me. Normally only use Devastating Blow in single target, otherwise always Pressing Attack even if just 2 enemies. And I think you saw how I used my bleeds, Cutting Attack, and then Grave Wound there. Since this is actually easy, I'm going to go to the school real quick. This is the exact same thing I did on my Lore Master, then I started dying, but I'm going to do this real quick to try and show a little bit of a longer fight just to maybe help you all some more. Usually the gameplay section I like to keep about 5 minutes, so this should be in line with that if I pull a single group here. But because this is signature and harder stuff, I'm going to use the blue line mark. This is a time when that's actually useful. And we'll go ahead and do a bunch of burst damage and use all my cooldowns here, plus I'm going to pull these other guys anyway. So now I'll use Time of Need, which kind of shows a useful time to get that battle ready state. And of course, I'm like getting stunned and disarmed right as soon as I enter this, and my stun remover is off cooldown, and this is a long 8-second stun. But go ahead and try and get back in this fight and get Shadow's Lambda so I can be battle ready to now use whatever 7 is on my bar to get... Yeah, fortunately this fight, like I was kind of thinking it might, especially since I pulled the extra group, but that kind of does show a longer fight, how you would end up playing it with the captain, and how I use Cutting Attack before Grave Wound, use a lot of the stuff on cooldown, and use all my cooldowns to start. So he's actually still in combat with me, so let me get my Archer back out, make him my Blade Brother real quick. Okay, so we're going to use Shadow's Lambda here, and then he's going to stun me, but I can remove that this time. And he disarmed me, so time to use Muster Courage. Okay, now we use Sure Strike, and then I'm already out of the battle ready. Okay, so now I'm battle ready again and can use Devastating Blow and Blade of Elendil from being battle hardened. Now I actually had a downtime when I could use Inspire there, and it slightly helps me with my morale. So I'm actually going to go ahead and use the damage one here. Hopefully I didn't need the heal one. I think it's about time, since the other group's coming, to go ahead and get my banner out and use all my buffs and cooldown skills. Once again, I'm getting disarmed. I feel like this is just one of the easiest instances to boot up, but it's kind of frustrating with all the disarms and stuns. But it does show how that stuff can impact gameplay, I guess, is one way to look at it. I'm probably going to die here again, but I can try to use Rallying Cry. I keep trying to get the AoE on these regular mobs. Okay, so I want to get my blue debuff on this guy real quick and try and hit him real quick so I can get some heals from that. And yeah, they ended up killing me anyway, which I actually expected. Again, I hope, like the last one, that me dying a bunch here isn't ruining how the gameplay actually plays out, so you can see that. But I think that showed enough of the gameplay. I'm getting kind of long here in the gameplay section, and my armor's getting damaged. But again, I hope that showed how it plays and how some of the traits and all the little things we got with that actually works out when you play the character and go through the game. And again, as you level and pick up the traits, it'll be a lot smoother transition. Right now, if you're just like starting out a captain, it might be a bit overwhelming, everything they have. And in general, they are a more advanced class. They have a lot of fun things to me about them. Compared to like a champion, for example, which is more cookie cutter in general. It's just an easier class like that. But yeah, as far as captain goes, that's how the red line my build works. Again, I will just bring up real quick that this is more focused on leveling and the legendary servers, all that stuff I talked about during the traits, and then more casual group content and even group content while leveling, but not quite probably the best build for endgame raiders, and endgame raiders would want a lot more trait points than me, about 30 more or even 30 more. More than 30 more than I have. I think 91 is the maximum or something crazy like that now. And I'm nowhere near close to that, and I'm still only 10 levels from the cap. But anyway, I do hope you all enjoyed this, and if you have any feedback, again, I'm still looking for feedback as I try and get more of these guides out, because I'm really enjoying doing them now, and I kind of quickened the process to get them. That was one of the annoying things back when I did them under LOTRO Basics. But again, I hope you all did enjoy, and please let me know any feedback you have. And if you did enjoy or learn something from this, please consider liking and subscribing for more, and thanks for watching, everyone.